Again, my name is Bruce Johnson. I'm a senior technical MEP specialist, so don't let the MEP side fool you. My background is in BIM management. I've been working with Autodesk products for almost 28 years now. In a couple more months, it'll be 28 years. Started with AutoCAD R12 in 1993 and have been working with it, training with it, and going through the paces of just about everything that came available through that time as trainer, reseller, consultant, and BIM manager for the past 13 years prior to coming to ATG. So picked up a lot of potential skills there on the BIM management side over the years. So hopefully today I get to show you a very small piece of that, but definitely something that most people, anybody who's a project manager, anybody who's a project coordinator or BIM manager assistant or something like along those lines should appreciate today's lesson. So as far as a PowerPoint, I don't really like PowerPoints all that much, right? So my goal is to keep that as short as possible and focus on kind of the meat as much as possible. So as far as the rules go on our webinar, very simple. On your Zoom controls, you do have a question and answer, a Q&A button that you can pop open. So if you guys do have some questions there, those will pop up as open questions on my machine. I'm going to be going through a lot of information, but don't hesitate to try and get some questions answered along the way. Also, anybody who is a BIM manager who's fully experienced, and maybe some of this is not so new, but you just want to see if you can pick up a few extra tips or whatnot. If you have your own tips, you could also post those in the question and answer area. And that just supports other users in trying to do the right thing for as many people as possible, solve problems in Revit. So hopefully you're not one of those people that say my peers in other companies need to suffer just like I did. Knowledge sharing is what we're doing here right now. So again, if you have those comments, we appreciate those as well. And if you have something new that I've never seen before, I can even send that over to our tech support team to log those things. So when we do have calls and maybe there's a custom error message or something we haven't seen before, we like to put those into our database as well, just to make sure we have as much information as possible to support our user base. So as far as the PowerPoint goes, again, I think I'll just go to my next slide, which is pretty much my last slide for the main part of the presentation here. So the goals here is, if you do have a Revit crash, how do you fix it? How do you fix it fast? So I'll talk a little bit about some pre-work with workset management and Revit troubleshooting, journal files, just kind of tip of the iceberg on journal files, what they are, how to find them, where they're at. Family corruption tools. We do have a CTC tool that does help find family corruptions. And then pre-crash strategies, things like model maintenance auditing, model warning checks, things like that. So that's pretty much my getting started here. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into Revit in my slideshow. So essentially I've got a basic Revit template open, just an architectural template right now. So whenever we do have a Revit crash, something goes terribly wrong, Revit decides to go haywire and you get the blue screen of death or something like that, something is obviously wrong. Usually the first thing I will do is find out from the user who contacts me about it. Is this going to be something that is a network issue? Is it going to be something that is a computer issue, or is it a software issue? Is it Revit generated? And you could have some oddball stuff like a Dynamo script or something blows up on you, and I'm not really going to go into that kind of thing today. So if you didn't save your work ahead of time and Revit crashes before you do something that may cause external problems just because of other coding or something going on, that's shame on you if you didn't save, right? So again, not going to talk about that part of it, but as far as the error checking, if you're in a business where you have multiple machines and multiple people on the same project, first thing to do is check with the neighbor. Is your file crashed also? Did something truly terrible go wrong, or is it just my machine? So that'd be the first step, is define the problem. Is it something I did personally? Is it something that's happening to the file in general, or is it a network issue of some sort where nobody can get access to the file? So once I've done that set of checks, usually I need to define, if it's a computer issue, is it a driver issue for a video driver? Is it somebody running out of RAM? Not enough disk space to cache the information on your hard drive, things like that are going on. Usually those are the network side and the computer side. And then when we get down to Revit itself, that's when we have the opportunity to say, what did Revit do to cause this issue? And is it global? Do we need to solve it for everybody, or do we just need to solve it on this machine? If it's just this machine only, chances are you can reopen your file by clearing the file and the backup file from your local drive. And then once you reopen it from Central, you get a fresh new copy and everything is running fine again. And that's a great scenario to have happen because it's a super easy fix, right? Just reopen after you've deleted your files. And in that case, no harm, no foul. But usually the thing I'm talking about today is going to be a corruption that causes the central file to go down. So in those cases, we need to have a way to troubleshoot and figure out what did we actually do? Why is it actually down? So in the case of pre-crash, what can we actually do to try and make sure that if we do crash, how do we get a file open? And kind of what are those potential reasons that we have files crashing? Is it potentially our file, or did we crash when we just opened the file originally? So maybe we got an update from a subcontractor, or if we are the subcontractor and maybe the prime is the architect, we get a new update from them and we put the file on our server and everything crashes. It's usually kind of a good indicator that somebody else's file might be the one that actually has the problem. So replacement of a file or a resync of a file or something like that, and it totally blows up on me. That's probably the first area I would go check. It's just to go find out what happened in the file, what did we do last, and then define if there's a way to maybe reload the previous file and it just pops right up and everything is fine. And then maybe I have a corrupt subcontractor file for the federated model. So in those cases, I'm trying to kind of quickly determine, is there something we can look at very quickly, test very quickly, and then have a resolution on it. Usually it becomes a little bit harder to figure that out. Maybe if you got a whole bunch of model updates from more than one vendor, you place them all in the right file folder and replace the old files, and then suddenly something blows up and you don't really know which one may have caused the problem. Or if you're working inside Revit and something blows up, crashes, and then you're not necessarily sure what happened, but maybe you got a warning message that popped up right as you crashed. It says, Revit can't continue. Do you want to save a backup file? Things like that sometimes happen. Other times they just blow up and die, just with no warning whatsoever. So in those cases, kind of like, what do we do to get started? So that's kind of a precursor to all of that. If we do our model setup correctly, potentially. Here again, I have an architectural just blank template file open, so nothing's basically set up. Usually one of the first things I would do is go into my my Collaborate tab. Go ahead and save my model. Documents is fine. Let's do test. And within my network, that's fine as well. And then worksets are enabled, right? So under my shared levels and grids and worksets, what am I actually going to generate as my actual worksets that I want to use? So if I'm in architecture, for instance, and this goes both ways between architecture and MEP and whatnot, if I know I have a mechanical file that I'm going to be linking in, I'll do _mech as a workset name. I'll do another one, _ELEC, another one, _PLMB. So you're noticing what I'm doing here is I'm setting underscores as my start of my linked files potentially. And then if I had, say, a fire protection, _FP, maybe there's a subcontractor that's not being done from the plumbing contractor. Other ones might be like custom kitchen or specialty stuff in there. I might do an _ site for the civil CAD plan. If I had CAD backgrounds, I might do CAD links. So as I'm setting up files, here's a way to specify with underscores anything that's a link. I could even say _link mech, _link elec, really depends on how you want to do your naming conventions. I like shorter names as possible as long as they're very descriptive. So again, my site would be anything that comes from the civil engineer. CAD links would be backgrounds of any kinds and or any control diagrams, anything like that that jumps at me. And then anything that is truly within my model, maybe I do a core/shell or something like that. Maybe another one's going to be interiors. Maybe if I have life safety stuff. So as I'm doing model setup, I'm using underscores for all my links. I'm using descriptive values to do my setup on my work sets. And then once I've generated all those correctly, if I say new, it's new, not new, but say okay to that. No, I don't want to make that my current work set. And now if I do a save again, first time it's been saved, do I want to save it as a central file? Yes. So essentially what I've done, and then when I sync, I'm going to relinquish all my user created work sets so they're no longer mine, and then work on my model setup to get that ready for everybody to use, right? So once I've done that, I should be able to use this as a central file. So if I were to close that central file, maybe I had a real problem with it for some reason. If I go back to the open dialog box, should have a test in here, right? If I had a real problem, I should now be able to say I want to open, but I also want to specify my work sets, not use last viewed editable all. So if I specify and say open, now I've got the option to actually look at my work sets before I've actually fully opened the file. So if I am kind of certain that I have a problem with a link because maybe a linked file may have crashed it. So I suspect maybe it's fire protection or something like that, but I'm not 100% sure. What I can do is go back and close all of my open work sets and let the file open. And it opens very, very quickly. The only thing that actually regenerates is 2D documentation. Anything that's sheets, drafting, views, things like that, if they were still open, I'd be able to see those. But all my 3D elements in the entire file are now turned off. So for my troubleshooting, usually what I'll do is I'll go into my Collaborate tab and my work sets, and I'll try to think, which one of these is probably my most likely problem? So if I thought it was fire protection, I could say open that, and then okay. And as it does its open, once it finds something on the fire protection that it really doesn't like and is causing the crash, Revit will shut down. It'll blow up, right? And then I know, hey, it's that file. So the next time I come into my open dialog box and I say specify, I can leave my fire protection turned off and open all other work sets in that case and see if I still get a crash or not. So I turn all these to yes, everything else becomes open. If I get a crash, it wasn't just fire protection, it was something else also, right? So using the work set option, usually what I'll do is if I have no clue what it might be, I'll just start opening links first, one at a time. Turn it to open, say yes, say okay. Once it's done, if it opened just fine, go down to my next one. Open up my work sets again, choose my electrical, turn it to open, say okay. And usually within 5 minutes, if something on a work set, an actual 3D object is corrupt, I'll know exactly which work set it came from. And it'll still crash my file when it happens, right? So it's going to take a few minutes to go back and figure out every possibility. But within usually 15 to 30 minutes, depending on file size, I can drill down to exactly which work set has a problem, whether it's somebody else's file or whether it's something in my file, and then know what I can go pursue after that point. So setting up work sets correctly is probably one of my highest level tools to define problems when Revit crashes, because I can drill down to exactly which component, whether it's an external file or whether it's a core and shell object, if it's an interior object. If I had a life safety specialty item or something like that for egress tracking or symbols or something like that that's causing the problem, chances are I can find it there. If I open all work sets and it doesn't crash, it could have been that I could just have fixed it with the audit command. So that would be another way to take a peek at any basic symbol problems. So again, if I were to do my file open, in most cases, if it's a file that is work shared, Now, if I can do audit and it's going to say it's going to take a long time, right? If I do audit and detach, that would be another way I could do a quick session and see if I could open the file detached. Sometimes it'll tell me I can't do it, and that's a real problem, but also solvable, but still. Occasionally, audit and detach won't work together. I've noticed that a couple times in my work. So if I do audit and not open as central, if I leave that the local object unchecked, sometimes that works. So depending on the combination of which three of those checkboxes that I try to use in the open dialog box. Audit, detach, and create new local. Those are basically three places I can kind of tinker with the file and see what happens. Most times if I'm just trying to find the solution to the problem, I'll just detach. And if it's on a file server, if I can get it open, I'll just rewrite over the top of the central file on the server. And that usually solves the problem in most cases. So that would be a quick way, if I can detach it and replace it, that's a great thing. If I don't want to lose all my backup history though, I don't want to usually do that right away. So depending on how your network is set up, what your IT has done for backup retrieval and things like that, my previous company had a noon and a midnight backup set, and those were good for up to a week. After that, it was every midnight for every 2 weeks back, and then beyond that, usually it would go to a month, and then it would go to tape drive. So that would all be backed up on a regular basis for us, and we could restore a shadow copy if we need to. But depending on firm size, sometimes you don't have those resources. Smaller firms usually don't have those kinds of resources around, sometimes not in-house at all, maybe a subcontractor for IT. So if you're in one of the smaller firms, trying to kind of receive some of the data that I'm giving you today would definitely help out to either have an end user, power user, or coordinator, or BIM manager. Try and figure these things out. So again, as far as basic troubleshooting goes, if I'm just trying to solve the problem without touching anything on the server, I'll always detach from central first. So I have my own local copy that I can tinker with. If everything works just fine for me, then I'll try to open up the local from the central file on server. See if I get the same error everybody else does. If I do, then I know that something's going on with the central file where it probably needs to be audited and detached and then replaced. The other side of all that would be to do model maintenance as preemptive. The larger the files are typically. In most cases, we would want to do model maintenance like every week to 2 weeks, depending on the file size. Can't really give a specific file size, but I would say any file that's over 500 megs, you'd probably want to do at least weekly model maintenance where you actually fully replace the central file. Keith is saying, when troubleshooting, is it best practice to have all users close out of the model? In this particular case that I'm talking about, when the file is corrupt, nobody can really be working in the model, right? If somebody's in there, that would be something that, yeah, you'd want to make sure that everybody is out of the file currently. If you presume that somebody still has a good file and theirs is not corrupt, that would be a good time to make a copy of that and just place it in a temporary location on their user drive in case maybe that is the most recent synced copy. So if that was the case, you could actually turn that into a new central model, right? So if I'm in a model now, if I was in a local file, if I went File, Save As, I could do Save As Project, and under my options, here I could say make this a new central file at that point, and also compact the file if I wanted to. So if somebody's got a good local file that's not corrupt, the fastest thing to do is say, who synced last? Find that good local file, have everybody else close out, save it as a new central on their C drive. If everybody closed out of the central model, open that one back up again and do a save as again, make new central file back on the server, and that'll overwrite the central file with a fresh clean copy. Usually I would do audit at the same time that I reopened that central file from the local machine, just to see if that picks up any cleanups of any mild corruptions at that point. That's basically all that the audit tool is actually for, is to look for minor corruptions within the file and take care of those little errors that pop up inside of Revit that it doesn't really know how to handle. So if it can discard those along the way, that's always a good thing, and not continue to build on some of the issues that may be in the file. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to do here in the setup side. I also usually have area work sets on very large building projects. So if I had multi-building, if I had building 1, 2, 3 or ABC, usually my work sets would also be included here with building 1 electrical or area A electrical. Again, like 1,000,000 square foot plus industrial projects, things like that. Those would be areas of concern. We have multiple areas for work sets where you can turn off specific areas of the building all at once, as opposed to having simpler work set designations. There's a question that my internet connection is not the best at the moment. Will there be a recording of this webinar? Yes, all of our webinars that we have at ATG will be listed on our website. Usually they'll do a little bit of audio cleanup and things like that on the file after the session is done, and then they'll post them on the website for atgusa.com. So that would be something you can go back to at any time. Keith also says, can you go into more detail on what to do for model maintenance? As far as other things that I would do for model maintenance, usually I would open up the file detached. I would usually do that at a time when nobody else is in the file. Notify the team first and say, by the way, we're doing model maintenance, say this every Monday morning. That's when we get all of our updates from all of our subs or whatnot, right? So as we do the new adds or the downloads of those files, place them on the server where they go, or write the old locations, maybe make archives of the previous version so we have copies in case we need them. On our model itself, that might be a good time to do model maintenance. So typically I would go into the central file location, make sure nobody else is in there. If I need to do workshare monitoring, if it's a file server, I could use that application to find out if anybody else was online or working from home or something like that, still in the model. So you don't want anybody else to be in the model at that time. But when you do the model maintenance, basically all you're doing is saying, I want to open this file detached and audited at the same time. Let it run through its audit process. It's a new detached file. When it finishes opening, you can do any other maintenance issues that you like. For instance, if you've got multiple users creating 15 different sections per day, and it's 2 weeks later, and you notice that you've got 175 sections that are just section numbers, I would do the CAD cop thing and go and delete all those that are numbers that aren't actually named, right? Or it doesn't even have somebody's initials on it to tell me it's theirs, or they're going to reuse it or something like that. It's not an active section that's on a sheet. I could look into a schedule and validate whether they're on a sheet or not, or I could use my project browser to show me everything not on sheets with filters in the project browser. And then if I just look at sections, 3D views, things like that that are basically unnamed, I can wipe all those out. Usually that reduces the file size by about 1/4 to 1/3 of a meg per section. So if you got 300 sections in there, you're probably going to get back 70 megs probably of your file size, which makes everything open and sync faster, right? So that would be what I would call my model maintenance, going through and validating what can we get rid of that's not really being used, things like that. So once I've done that process as a detached file, I would do a save as, go back to the server location and just overwrite that file. So it totally wipes it out. Some people will say that you need to remove the backup folder and the actual file first. I could have Windows file manager open at that time and go into the correct folder for my save as. So I select that file and it's ready to hit the save button, but then I can go into my file explorer and hit my delete of my backup folder and my actual file. Go back into Revit, hit save, then it rewrites that file and makes the new backup folder, right? So then everything is rewritten. And then the last piece of that is once you've done model maintenance and you've reopened the file as a new local as a test, making sure that it opens correctly and there's nothing wrong with it, no corruptions from other files and whatnot. At that point, then I would notify the team that they need to delete their local file and the backup folder on their local machine. And then once they start a fresh file from the new central, that means that their backup data and their local file information that is a different file size and whatnot, none of that's coming back into the central file at that point. So that's typically what I would do normally for what we call model maintenance at that point. So if you have lots of problems with file corruptions, model maintenance is a key thing to prevent file corruptions. Make sure that everybody's working fresh every week to every 2 weeks, depending on file size. It's just a really good idea as something to maintain your models and make sure that they're working well. Now, if we're doing BIM 360, that would be a slightly different process because you can't do a detach from central on a BIM 360 file, right? So if I come in here to my BIM 360 and say I want to look at this MEPPP19 file, there is no detach from central option within BIM 360. So if I were to go here, I could go into specify, right? With my little 3 dots. Most people don't even tend to notice that that's even there, but in BIM 360, you do have the option to do specify here. See your work sets before you open. So I could, again, if I knew I had a problem with the BIM 360 model, I'd come in here and say, yes, I want to turn a bunch of these off. Typically, with the older dialog box, you also would have the option to audit at that same place. So I'm going to let that spin up as a little bit as I kind of make sure I'm going through my notes correctly here. Again, if you guys have other questions and whatnot, go ahead and post them in the Q&A section. All right, so that's model maintenance. Another thing that we would typically do, if you can get the model open and you're not sure what's making it crash, I would also check your model warnings. Typically, when I have 500 or more model warnings within my project, usually that's when I start having a little bit of concern. It's not really where I become CAD cop and say, you must go fix that right now, but I start to take notice of it. Anything under 500, unless it's a warning that I'm not fully aware that whether or not it's going to do something bad in my model. The majority of the time I kind of ignore it until I have a real problem like a crash. And then I really want to know what those warnings say, right? If it's over 1,000, then I usually urge the team to make sure they start doing warning cleanup. So if somebody started a architectural model with room bounding lines and no actual walls, and they had those because they're 2D objects, they only show up on the view that they're created on, right? So then you have to know which view that is that you've done all your setup on and go back in and remove all those bounding lines for your rooms because maybe you wanted to place room objects and get an idea of kind of how big they were and run a schedule and know your spaces and kind of do a lot of figuring ahead of time before you really start drawing anything. That's all possible in Revit, but those room bounding lines, when you draw walls over the top of them, eventually those walls move, but the bounding lines stay there. That actually causes problems for the MEP guys because those room boundings are the boundings of the spaces as well, same as your rooms. So if you don't remove them, then they don't actually go to the wall edges, and that eventually causes some major issues and lots and lots of warnings inside of Revit. So that's just one of those areas I like to have cleaned up as soon as possible. And if you do an entire building layout with room bounding lines, then that's room separation lines. That would be an area of concern to go do a massive cleanup at some point. Make sure you know which view those were created in, hopefully a named view. They would have those names in them. And then be able to wipe those out or do some sort of a quick select that would let me see them directly. And we do actually have a tool for that as well. CTC software does have a free tool. If you don't have our CTC BIM project suite, go to atgusa.com and find our software applications. Within there, there's a CTC BIM project suite. You can get a 14-day trial of this. So everything that's dark green will be available to you for 14 days. Anything that is light green in the free tools, you get to keep forever. And one of those is quick select. So if I knew, for instance, I had room bounding lines or room separation lines with my model, I could go in and say, apply this filter to my entire project and look for a category. And if I found my R's down here, I should be able to see them in here. Rooms. So not 3D objects, they may not show up in this particular tool. That'd be my one thing that I'd need to go find. If it doesn't show up here in quick select, then I might go find just one or even draw one in a model and then select it and right click on it and say select all instances in project and then hit the delete key and they should all be gone, right? So lots of ways to skin the cat there. If it's any kind of a 3D object, this free tool for quick select finds just about everything that's a Revit category And you can even use filters in there to pare down to exactly what you want. All right, so anything over, say, 10,000 warnings in a model, that's when I would truly call all stop. Everybody pens down, do everything you possibly can to remove warnings from this file. So if you're not working on warnings, you shouldn't be in the file whatsoever. Go fix them. The most I've ever seen in one file within a company that I've worked for is over 14,000. It was less than 15,000, but I know it was over 14. So when you start hitting those kinds of numbers, usually Revit's trying to calculate what's going on with the warnings and figure out what it can do with them. And that causes Revit to really stumble. It's extremely slow. So if you don't know where your warnings are, typically your Manage tab on your ribbon is where we want to go. And then towards the right end, there's an inquiry area. And right above that, there's a warnings. This particular file is a MEP all-inclusive file. So everything is in one file at one time. Most of the time when I check warnings, I'll go to the very bottom and hit the last expander. And that'll tell me how many warnings I have in the file currently. And I'll usually work backwards. Which one has the most warnings? What's the most typical warning that I have? So I've got 1600s. If I go back up, just 1500s. 1524, I haven't hit a big number yet. Usually there'll be at least one category with potential zillions of them. 1300, no loss defined, element of type. So from warning 1 up to warning 1234 are all the element of type has an open connector. It's disconnected from whatever thing it was supposed to be on. So open connectors I'm not too worried about, but when I start worrying about other warnings by type, if I have 1,000 of another type or even a couple hundred of another type, it's trying to calculate flow. I could go turn off my calculations and get rid of all those warnings for a little while, but I may want to leave those on and see what they are. Anytime I actually expand these out, in most cases, if I select on it, I can actually see the element ID. So if I have a problem with a thing that I know is causing corruption or problem in my model, usually I can find this element ID, write it down, and then go back into my select by ID, which is right above warnings, and then type in this element ID, and that will actually let me see a show option. Sometimes the show option here doesn't actually work, but in most cases it will. But if I have an element ID where I can't find it for whatever reason, there's an actual object that's hidden in the file. It won't actually show in any active view. Doing select by element ID will actually typically let me select it, see it in my properties, and then even hit the delete key and remove it from the model at that point. That'd be another way to get rid of objects that are causing problems that you know are real problems in the model. So don't neglect your warnings. In this case, there's my object. Something within my legend. Pipe types copper L soldered. So somewhere in here I have a copper pipe type. Not sure where that one's at, but it's within this particular view. And this one is in a design option. So maybe if it has a flow direction mismatch, if I just change the flow direction on the pipe, then that warning would go away. So shouldn't cause a problem where it crashes Revit, but again, that's just looking into warnings and kind of seeing what's there. What is Revit telling me I need to figure out? Here I've got a lighting fixture called Do Not Delete. So lots of potential things in my model that in this case I may be ignoring some of those. Duplicate type mark values, I might ignore some of those, right? Duplicate mark values, usually I'll not worry too much about that, but when I find my room is not a properly enclosed region, Revit really likes to have rooms being enclosed properly. So you'll have too many of these or boundaries that kind of touch each other at the same point or right next to each other, but they're still not closed. That can cause more problems, especially even in linked files like the MEP guys. You may not have a problem in architecture whatsoever, but the MEP suffers at that point because the model's not quite closed up like it should be. That causes problems in spaces, having MEP's room names show up correctly, things like that. So usually when we find those rooms not in closed regions correctly, if I'm in SD, I don't usually care, but as soon as I get to a DD phase, I want those to be cleaned up as much as possible because other team members are going to have issues with it thereafter. Just a couple hints there as to when you get that phone call from a sub and they say, hey, your architectural model's all jacked up. What do we do? And you can't find it. That's remaining a problem until you fix it. So it's one of those areas. It works both ways as well. If you have items attached to ceiling planes and things like that, and architecture links things in, and suddenly it kind of blows up in the architecture model through the link, then you might have the phone call the opposite direction as well. Maybe you've done something that architecture doesn't like or can't use, or it's causing some type of a glitch within Revit where it just can't figure out what it needs to. If they have calculations turned on in their model or things like that, maybe shouldn't be. Those can always cause issues if they're not set up correctly in templates. So let's see. So typical reasons for crashes. I've got a couple of things written down here. Usually corrupt views could cause issues. Usually when a view goes corrupt, it's just a corrupt view. And in most cases, if you recreate the view, not by a duplication of the view, but actually recreating a view from scratch, applying the same view template, whatever the issue in the view was at that point usually goes away. So if you do have a problem with the view, you know it's going horribly wrong. Again, don't go into the view itself. I see people do this all the time. I've even seen it happen in my teams doing work with people on tech support. So if I go into my HVAC view and something is just horribly wrong in here, something's not displaying, whatever that might be, instead of saying I want to right click and duplicate view and just make a new one, because you think I am making a new view, that word copy there at the end should be giving you the first clue that it really is a copy of the view. And every time I've ever done that doing tech support, I always get the same problem in the copied view. So if I don't want to have a duplication of the problem, I would have to come in and say new view, plan view, floor plan, choose my level 1, and then I've got a brand new fresh level 1, but here I have a working HVAC floor plan. So if I go to my view template, I go to my mechanical HVAC plan working and apply that. Now I should see basically the same thing as I had in my previous view, and it should actually sort into my browser as well in the same place. Actually, I did floor plan instead of ceiling plan, so it's not going to show up the same. But within this view, if my floor plan version should be this guy, if this one was the one that had the problem and I reapplied my new template to this new one that's called level 1, then if there was something missing in the previous one here, I should be able to have a freshly restored view with a new view template applied correctly. So if that was a corrupt view, I could just pick in it, do a copy, and then click out of it, delete it, and then pick in here, do my naming convention, Control V, have a fresh new view, and then be off and running again, no problem whatsoever. So that's just a quick fix within Revit itself, if just the view is the problem at that point. And that's usually not going to crash Revit, but it's just one of those things I've learned to do over time to make sure that corrupt views are fixed. So other typical reasons for crashes, excessive warnings. Again, if you have over 1,000, I would start working on them. If nobody in the group has time that's familiar with the project, then I would continue to watch. If it hits 2,000, then I'd make sure the project manager knows this needs to be done. If you hit 3,000, it needs to be done. Like, put somebody on it now. If you get to 5,000, I might even do an all stop at 5,000 just to say, hey, clean all this stuff up, make sure that your warnings are taken care of. As soon as you get it down under 1,000, let the team start working again, but still have one person trying to go through and fix the warnings as much as possible. It's mark values. don't really care all that much, right? If it's type mark values, probably want to fix more of those if you have more than one of the same type mark value in each family, because the type mark should be different. And beyond that, other warning types, you need to kind of keep a log if you're the BIM manager of what warning types cause crashes, and you realize that this is a reason for a crash. Keep a OneNote document, keep something, a spreadsheet, whatever that might be as your helper, so that when you're looking at warnings, you know which ones are critical and which ones are just mundane. And when you look at those warnings, again, you should be able to export the warnings out. So if I were to go back to my warnings, see how there's an export tool. If I do an export to an HTML, I should be able to do a Control-C or Control-F or something like that to do a find on a page and see if you can actually go through and find certain warnings by their types that you know are critical warnings, and then be able to work on those from that point. File writing interruptions. Typically, if people are working from home, like in the COVID side, and maybe there's somebody working off of a DSL line, or they're working off of a hotspot in Starbucks from their cell phone, usually those are kind of no-nos, right? You don't have enough bandwidth to really work on BIM models. Not to say that it isn't done. It's kind of a no-no. It really shouldn't be done, right? But occasionally somebody will be, I have to get some work done wherever I'm at, and they'll jump on. And whenever you lose bits or bytes of data in the file transfer, that usually will cause corruption problems within the file. So if somebody's doing something and they're syncing and there's a internet interruption or even a file server interruption internally on a network, occasionally that can corrupt a file. So extremely hard to track and troubleshoot those things, even through IT. When it loses data, you could look at file size down to the byte and see if there's a file size difference from one save to the next or something like that. It's probably really not going to tell you anything. There may be some other IT tracking stuff that can be looked at, but in most cases, when you do lose that little bit of information, it could be something that crashes the entire file. Maybe project setup information that Revit needs at the very start of the write of the file. Or if it's something later, it could be something built into maybe a family, where a family gets corrupt. It doesn't know how to fully save that element correctly. So in those cases, you need to have a workflow and a methodology to figure out what actually happened. Not everybody being on the same Revit version or hotfix. If you're in a larger firm, sometimes hotfixes are deployed through like SCCM or through a batch script or a robocopy or something like that to get the change. And typically when those happen, not every machine is potentially turned on. Somebody's out on vacation for a couple of weeks, they took their computer home with them and they're not within the network, so you can't drive that session to do the update. So depending on IT's capabilities to track hotfixes and updates, are they actually deployed correctly on every machine or not? That would be another area where a bug in one version is fixed in another and vice versa. And when somebody saves and syncs, it's fine, and the next person saves and syncs, the bug is still there, and that may do a file corruption as well. So having everybody on the same version within the office for each Revit version out there. So 2018, 19, 2021. Each of those are the Revit versions themselves, and then the hot fixes would be the the .1, the .2, .201, whatever those might be. Try to make sure everybody's on the same version of Revit across the project. And then another one that I have a hunch on is starting projects with older versions of Revit templates. So like my previous company, we actually had files that started in Revit 2013 that were upgraded every other year. So it'd be 2013, 2015. I think we went to 2016 and skipped 17 because of the text issues or whatnot that were popping up initially in there before the real hotfix solved the text issues. And then we went to 2018, and then from that point on, everybody was working on so many collaborative projects we did every year. So 2019, 2021. But literally when you upgrade a template over and over and over again, you're not actually getting all of the changes into the new version. And one of the things that I found early on from 2013 to 2014 was 2013 added a D loop leader for arrowhead types. So if you look at dot leaders, closed-end leaders, things like that, those were all still there from the previous versions, but the D-loop leader never arrived in our projects, even up in like 2016. I was like, I know we have a D-leader and that works really great on pipe objects or control diagrams and things like that. And we just didn't have it in the project template. Other things that happened were like the structural had a full brand new steel library with analytics in it from 2015 to 2016. So continuing to upgrade from 2013, all the steel library never updated, even though we had the library from out of the box loaded on our server. And we could load families that had the analytic information in them. Our template wouldn't accept the analytics. So in the view visibility graphics, we see there's a analytical model categories. This wouldn't show up in our template because we upgraded it from 2013 all the way up to 2016. And then 3 months into our deployment, somebody said, oh, by the way, I know there's some new stuff in here. Why don't we have it yet? And the purveyor of the structural template said, we just upgraded it from the previous one. So he literally had to go rebuild the template from scratch from the 2016 template, bring all of our potential content that we needed that didn't exist in the new out of the box into that session. Then everybody could actually work fine and use the analytical properties of the structural steel. So using templates that are too old may give you corruption issues. I'm suspect of that. We probably had 2 to 3 file corruptions per week as a typical in my last firm. We had almost 1,000 employees in the company, probably upwards of 250 projects running at one time across 25 offices. So when you look at the number of projects versus the number of corruptions, the number is fairly small. We just had to continually deal with certain projects over and over again that would go corrupt. And then trying to figure out what it is causing that corruption. I was again suspect due to having upgraded so many times from previous versions. Because when I called Autodesk about it, I actually got them on the phone. They said, you have way more file corruptions than any other firm that we've worked with recently. I'm like, well, we have a lot of projects out there. They're like, no, we work with firms that have 4,000 and 5,000 projects at one time. You have way more file corruptions than they do. I was like, okay, point taken. So then I started thinking about it. It's like, well, if we've upgraded all these templates over and over and over again and not actually started with the out-of-the-box template and added our stuff to it correctly, maybe that's a source again where previous version isn't really talking well. So if it's a 2013 template and analytical structural steel properties are turned on and it has nothing in the families to go back to, is that causing my file corruption? It's quite potential. So little things like that I have kind of picked up over time that I'd prefer to rebuild my template on every new version, especially when Autodesk does something substantial to that version. So there's a couple of new things in 2020 and 2021 for the MEP side. There's some new analytics for building energy modeling within the HVAC side. So if I didn't start from a 2021 template, chances are I'd be missing something that it might need. And then if I get a file corruption when I try to run those tools, chances are I just have a bad template. So again, areas of concern, whether that's the true cause or not, that's something that's debatable, right? Let's see. So during crashes, occasionally you get a Revit warning that gives you a message that tells you why it's crashing, and you can usually expand that message and see what it actually says. It doesn't always give you really good information, especially when you click details, it looks very cryptic. But a lot of times, if you at least take a screen snapshot of that, and if you close out of your file, maybe it's asking you to do a backup or something like that. In most cases, when you delete your local and your backup files, or just move them to a different folder in case you wanted to keep them, then you can open a fresh clean copy from the server. And if I don't get that same issue and I try to save and sync again, chances are it's probably just my file. So that'd be a potential quick fix if it was me just as an end user and my machine is causing the problem. If I get that same message over and over again, then there's probably something else going on with the file. I'm going to check with a neighbor or somebody else who's also in it, see if they're having the same problem or not, and look for the real file corruption at that point. Occasionally, you'll also get an error code of some sort from Revit, it'll actually tell you, I'm failing because of this reason, I'm about to crash. Again, screenshot that if you can. And then usually I'll take that screenshot and look up that error code on Google and see if there's a knowledge base or other information online, YouTube article, something from an end user or forum where somebody's had that same issue. And usually you'll find a fix for it at that point. So not all errors are going to be errors that cause true crashes. Sometimes it'll just kind of mess you up for a little while and not necessarily do anything to anybody else because maybe you've killed Revit, but you didn't save and sync, so it's not really pushed into the central file at that point. So usually I don't worry about those too much. I do want to find out what the error code means and why. Other things I typically do as far as how do I do a quick definition of something that happened. My fix is usually to define the problem first. And then as far as what are my tools in my toolbox, the journal files in Revit are one of my first places I would go because I could, as a BIM manager, I could go onto anybody's machine and suck the journal files off and open them up and read them. I could do that very quickly and usually know what the issue was before I even contact the user and say, hey, here's your problem. This is what you need to do. So if you're good at journal files, that would be my first resource. If you're not good at journal files, that's something you'd probably want to study up on a little bit. My second quickest method would be to start working with the worksets like I initially started talking about. And my third method, usually on a file corruption, if it's not workset based, it's probably going to be a family issue or a family gets overwritten or loses information somehow in a write of the file, in which case I do have another CTC software to take a peek at real quick. So let's say I open my worksets and I find out that my, say, fire protection in this file, not file protection, but say fire alarm device is the thing that's causing me the problem. If I open fire alarm workset, it crashes. Probably because it's in my file, the families in my fire alarm are broken, at least one of them. If I go to my free tools in this batch suite, again, 14-day free trial, but the free tools are yours forever. If I do family exporter, I have the option of looking at all my Revit categories. So if I have fire alarm devices, I could click on that. I could even look at every fire alarm family. If I had a suspicion that one of these was going to be my offender at that point, I can click on everything, export all families all at once, or I could uncheck that so choose nothing, choose a group such as fire alarm devices, or even just do a selection set, I believe. I got to do one at a time. If I do a shift select, I don't quite get them all in here, but if I want to write these out, do a troubleshooting, say Revit families folder, maybe it's a temp folder or something like that. I could also do a prefix or a suffix. So if I wanted to give them a fancy name, testing -- or something like that as a prefix, I could do export. It's going to take a few minutes, so I'm going to say continue and just let it run. And it's going to run through and it's looking at these 9 families. If any of these produces an error, that means the family's corrupt. So it's probably going to run through and say I'm successful at this point. But here's my option of saying I want to export families. If I wasn't sure where my corruption was, but I think it's a family, I could select everything, let it run for 20, 30 minutes, maybe on a test machine or something like that up to the side, and come back and look at my report and see this event was successful. It wrote all of them, exported 9 families. If it had a red flag on there, then I would say I need to reload that particular family back into my project. Once it's overwritten and the parameter values are overwritten, run that export again, validate that I don't have an error whatsoever, and then do a save, and then reopen the file and see if I opened correctly with all worksets turned on. If so, I just solved my problem. So corrupt families, this particular tool, again, it's totally free to use. You don't even have to buy it. Is a fantastic tool for looking for family corruptions. We had a 7 million square foot job, probably 2.5 gigabytes of Revit files all federated across the models. And it would be one of those that would crash probably every other week or so. Steve is asking, can I discuss journals? Yes, I'm gonna put that on my last thing here. I've got about 5 minutes left. So as far as journals go, essentially to find your journals. If I were to jump into my Windows File Explorer, right? To find a journal, if I go to my PC, Windows, under your users folder, your username, or the username of the person who's working on the Revit files. Usually app data is a hidden folder. So if I didn't see app data here, I could just pick inside my location up here and add a / app data, and it will take you to the app data folder, even if you can't see it. In that case, go to local, Autodesk, and Revit. Under Revit, you'll have each of your machine's Revit versions. Your pack cache is for BIM 360. That's the location of the sync files. But under, say, Revit 2019, where I'm at now, your collaboration cache is where you find your local files for BIM 360. If you didn't know that was there, that's where that's at. And it does have these weird long hexadecimal type names to find your local files. So you can't actually say, oh, this is my project 12345 architectural central 19 file. It's not going to be there. You'd have to know which file, hopefully by probably date modified last would be your first clue as to which one was the one you were just working in, if you wanted your local file. But also in the journal files, you can find that same information. So if I go to my journals folder and look at my journal documents, here I've got my 1015, that's today, it's 1257 right now, the last write was 1255. These are live text files. So as you continue to work in it, it's continually adding stuff to it, even if you open it with a text editor. So within the journal files, if I've crashed and I'm the end user and my machine was the one that just crashed, I almost always go straight to the bottom and then I read backwards. So I read through some of the things that are actually going on here. And there's a lot of garbage in here, so it's not something that's easy to read through, right? So if I kind of go back up, usually I'm trying to find if there's a big error, giant warning, something that's going to tell me where the last thing happened before it crashed. And usually to do that, I will go down to the very bottom, actually pick at the bottom, and do Control F. That's just a control find. And if I type in the word error and hit find next, it'll take me up in the list if I have my direction set up. So it goes up and it tries to find my last error. If I want to do the same thing I could do for warnings, if I had a room separation line issue or something like that, I could type in some of those keywords, match case or not, wrap around or not, just go back and find some of these potential errors. And you can actually go through and find, see all these warnings in here. All those warnings were when I did my warnings dialog box, right? It's telling me all that element information on all those warnings because I did that in my Revit session. So a journal is basically showing you everything you've done in Revit from the time that you opened it until the time that you closed it. And that's your current Revit session. So as far as Revit sessions go, this is a way to parse through your file and see what each user did. So if they opened it and closed it 10 times, then you'd have 10 different journal files with dates and timestamps when they actually closed the Revit session. So journals are very, very nice to be able to deep dive very quickly. So somebody puts in a help desk ticket or they call you on the phone and say, I have a problem, I just crashed. If I have access to their C drive, usually through a C $sign through the IT portal, I can go directly to their user folder, find the last journal file, validate from which Revit version they were working in, and then evaluate the file and see if I can find an error very quickly. If it has a warning and has an error code, again, I can Google that code and see exactly what happened when it crashed, and then look for an appropriate resource to get their file back to what it was. So if it's something that won't open whatsoever, maybe I'll look at the backup folder and try to restore one. And if not, then I can hopefully troubleshoot through the warnings and figure out exactly what the user did. If you're really good at journals, you can tell exactly how many picks and clicks that they made through the entire project. If you're really good at journals, you can even see exactly what they did by turning the journal file into a Revit script. So you could open a backup version from the time before they started and then go through their journal, suck out all of the content in the journal that was their actual picks and clicks, and then run that as a Revit script and see exactly what they did from the time they started until it actually crashed. You can see if that reproduces the issue on your machine and see what the warning says there. So a couple of resources that I wanted to show you guys on journal files, because I don't really have time to really explain journal files, right? I bring in my Google. I have Autodesk University Online as a search. If you just type into Google Autodesk University Online, you'll notice it has a free online classes and tutorials from Autodesk University. If you click into there and I do a search for journal files, one that's really good is this one written by Zachary Kahn and Brian Mackey. I forget what year this was. It was 2018. Revit journal files, they aren't just for Autodesk support. That is a very good session. If you can go into the video, the handout, the presentation, and slides, and the downloads that show you what you can do, you can see that there's understanding how journal files can be used as Revit scripts, like I just talked about, how to use a journal file for repetitive tasks. So these are things you can do with a journal file that aren't really for the troubleshooting side, but you can do lots of things with them, especially generating Revit scripts that are applying. Say I laid out a group of pieces of electrical equipment or something like that, and they have to happen on every single floor. I could go back and use my journal file to generate a script, so I can go to my next floor and run that script and have all those same families applied to that new floor with the new objects. So things like that are pretty darn cool when you get into them. The other side is the code blue, Dr. Revit, how to resuscitate corrupt Revit models. That's the big one here for Matt Wunsch and Nauman. I'll let you guys read that instead of trying to say it. But the description here, key learnings on how to triage a corrupt Revit model, how to parse the journal and slog files for diagnosis, learn how to resuscitate a corrupt Revit model, and best practices to minimize file corruption. There's a lot of really, really good data in this one. So I encourage anybody to jump out on the Autodesk University free website, download that content, parse through that, and start getting a good idea. If you're dealing with Revit corruptions on a regular basis, that's definitely something that will help you out in your workflows, trying to figure out what is it I need to do, how can I solve these problems very quickly. So I don't see any other questions in the queue, and I'm about 3 minutes over, so I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. If you guys do have more questions, contact us at ATG USA. If you have an account manager, just contact them. If you don't have one, you're on for the first time listening to us or whatnot, and you want to kind of pick our brains a little bit more, or you have specific problems you want to deal with, anybody who's our customer gets free tech support. So you just call in and have the problem triaged for you, and then usually we have a 2-hour response time on emails and whatnot from that side of it. And if you're not our customer yet, even buy one of our tools, like I was talking about with the CTC software, the project suite, the BIM manager suite, the batch suite. Those are all fantastic tools we would like to give you a demo on if you haven't ever seen them before. Being able to export to spreadsheets, being able to bring in spreadsheets, being able to fix schedules with content from manufacturers. Parameter Jammer lets you put all the scheduled parameters into the family, and then it schedules correctly. There's Family Processor and other tools in the BIM Manager suite that are fantastic. So just wanted to mention those and make sure you guys are aware that some of those things are available to you. And again, we'd love to show them to you at some point. So I'm going to stop my video now and let you guys try and learn more on your own a little bit. And as you need to ask for help or whatnot, we are here for you. So thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.